Imagine you wake on a June morning, and you know straight away, today it comes. The train that only runs in June. No one knows where it rolls from, and no one asks. You simply take a seat if you're on the platform at this hour. You sit in the compartment and notice how the light falls through the windows, not golden like in normal summer, but brighter somehow, as if milk were shining through. Outside, landscapes drift past that you might have seen before, only arranged differently. The trees stand in different positions, the lakes are larger, or perhaps only because you've taken this train. Perhaps they change for it when it arrives. The other passengers are quiet. They don't read, they don't look at their phones. In this train, they don't work. Everyone understands that straight away. Instead, they sit and breathe calmly, as if they've been waiting for exactly this day. You don't recognize any of them, but you know them somehow. They belong here like you do. In June, you belong here. The conductor comes past, an older woman with gray hair and a smile that knows more than it's allowed to say. She doesn't need to see your ticket. She knows you're here rightly. Everyone is here rightly. That's only possible in June, on this train. The landscape changes, but gently. No sharp corners, only transitions. A river becomes a lake. The lake becomes forest. The forest opens to a valley you dimly recognize. Wasn't that always there? In June, time is woven differently. It stretches like taffy. A minute lasts an hour, and you don't mind. You notice you're becoming lighter. Not weightless, that would be frightening, but light like a leaf drifting on water that knows where it's going without resisting. The train vibrates at a frequency you feel in your whole body, in your bones, in your thoughts. That's its rhythm. That's how it moves. The air in the compartment smells of summer rain, of linden flowers, of things that don't exist, yet your body recognizes them anyway. Each breath is deeper than the last. The windowsill warm beneath your fingers, not hot, just pleasant, as if the June sun forgives itself for giving all its energy for this 1 month. You open your hand and see that the skin there's become more golden, radiant, like old coins from dreams. Time itself seems to have a different tempo here. Seconds become minutes, which become hours, but without the rush, without the strain. It's as if each moment were stretched like honey in warmth, golden and sweet and unstoppably slow. You can feel how your heartbeat adapts to the train, how your breath synchronizes with the wheels. You're not simply in the train anymore. You're part of the train, part of this journey, part of June. The man beside you, haven't you only just noticed him? Reads a book whose pages don't turn. Instead, the words themselves seem to move, wandering across the paper like ants, searching for where they should be read. He doesn't notice or accepts it like you do, with the quiet acceptance that in June everything works differently. His spectacles shimmer blue like moonlight. Does he always wear them, or only in June? The pages of his book smell of rose oil and decades-old summers. You'd like to ask what he's reading, but your voice doesn't work. That's all right too. In June, you don't need to speak. The silence says everything. The other passengers are nodding off now. You see how their heads tilt gently to the side, their breathing grows longer. No one sleeps ungracefully. Everyone looks as if they're gliding into the deepest trust. On this train, you can let yourself go. Here it's safe. Here it's always June. The train itself seems to breathe. The wheels find a rhythm that isn't metallic, but warm, organic, like a heartbeat hidden beneath great mountains. You don't wonder whether this is real. Real and dream are the same place here. That's the secret of this train. It doesn't teach you to know the differences. It teaches you to understand that there never were any. This train, that only runs in June, exists somewhere between memory and hope. It's not on the map, and yet you know every centimeter of this journey. It's the train you've always needed, the place where arriving and traveling are the same thing. A swallow appears at the window and flies beside the train for a second, a silver feather in the light. It's not surprising. Everything in June will belong to you. The bird's wing beats at the same pace as the train engine, as if they've always been traveling together. The swallow looks at you, one eye small and knowing, and you recognize it straight away. That was the bird from your childhood dream, the bird you've always wanted to see. Here it is. In June, you find what you've lost. The other passengers are now completely asleep. A girl with plaits has rested her head against the windowsill. An old man snores gently, his breath in rhythm with the wheels. A woman in red smiles in her sleep as if she's dreaming of something beautiful, and probably she is. In June, you only dream beautiful things. It's not possible to have bad dreams here. The window shows you something that can't exist. A city that never was, with houses painted of light and shadow. Children play there, their voices inaudible, but you feel them like a melody you've heard 100 times in a dream. The train doesn't drive through, it drives around, respectfully, as if the city were sacred. You don't ask yourself where this train is going. Where is that even relevant? The path is the destination, and the path has long been a destination. Every rail beneath the train sings its song. Every kilometer is a verse. In June, you finally understand that travel exists only so we can find ourselves, the ones we've forgotten. In your lap lies your ticket, and you notice the writing has changed. Where there were numbers just moments ago, now there are pictures. The lake from a distance, the swallow, a window you open and can't find. No train ever had a ticket with pictures, but this train isn't like all the others. This train knows your dreams before you dream them. Time stretches. You're not sure if it's still morning or already midnight. In June, there's only 1 hour, the hour in which you can finally breathe. The window is now completely dark, not because night is falling, but because the train's entered a forest whose trees stand so close that no light gets through. Yet that's all right too. In darkness, you see better. You close your eyes and suddenly see everything more clearly. Every tree, every star behind the trees, every small clearing where deer stand watching the train as if they'd been expecting it for a long time. You wonder whether you'll ever get off this train, whether it's necessary. June lasts only a month in the normal year, but here June could last forever. And perhaps that's the point. Perhaps this train exists precisely to show you that there's a place where the best time doesn't end, where you simply sit and the landscape flows past you and know that you're exactly where you must be. Your eyes grow heavy now. The rattle of the train becomes a lullaby that knows your name. In June, names don't exist. Everyone is just dreams, and dreams are just names. The conductor walks past and covers you with a blanket that smells of lavender and old summers. You don't ask yourself when this blanket arrived. It was always here, like this train, like this June, like you, sleeping and still traveling, still standing in the light that only happens in June. On the line from Erstfeld to Görschkenen, through the Alpine chain, through the greatest mountains, there are 2 tunnels, 2 long, dark tunnels. And between them, for only a few seconds, there is a silence, a special silence. A silence that isn't merely the absence of sound, but the presence of something else. Something that exists only in those few seconds. Something that has taught me everything. The first tunnel is long and dark. Very long, very dark. The train enters, and the lights outside disappear at once, as though extinguished, blown out. And there's only the wall of rock passing by, meter after meter, centimeter after centimeter. And the rattle that changes, because the air changes, because the air becomes denser, because the space changes. and your heart, it beats faster, like a child's, going into the darkness, going alone into darkness, and not knowing whether others will guide it. And you ask yourself, will the tunnel never end? Will the light ever return? And the fear, it grows with every meter, with every beat of your heart. And you hold on to your seat, to your breath, to the hope that sometime, soon, very soon, the light will return. But then, after a while, after what seems like a long time, after what seems like forever, the light returns. The train leaves the tunnel, and there is a moment, just one moment, when the sun shines in, really shines in, into the compartment, like a blessing. And I think in that moment that this, perhaps, is what we live for. Not for the tunnels, not for the darkness, but for this second, this indescribable, wonderful second, when the light touches your face, and everything, really everything, makes sense. And you see your face in the pain, as though the mountain were looking in your eyes, as though the earth were saying hello, as though you were arriving at your own life. And in this moment, between the first tunnel and the second, between past and future, there is this silence. And it is not like silence otherwise. It isn't the absence of sound. It's the opposite. It is music. It is song. It is the song that the earth sings when no one's listening, when only the mountains listen, when only time listens. And you, suddenly, are also part of this song. And I understand in that moment that I've been trying for a long time, far too long, to avoid this silence. I've avoided it with work, with worries, with distraction. But it was always there, waiting, in the spaces between, in the pauses, in the moments between breath and breath. And now I sit here and I let it come. I let this silence flow through me, and I understand that this, perhaps, is the only truth I ever needed. It's not the silence of darkness. It's not the silence of fear. It's not the silence of dread. It's the silence between two times. The first tunnel, the past, the darkness from which we came. The second tunnel, the future, the darkness into which we go. And in this silence, between past and future, there is only now. Only this moment, only this second, this single precious second, where the mountain glows, where the sun shines, where everything is possible, and everything is real. And my breath becomes one with this silence. My heart beats in the rhythm of this silence. My thoughts become still. And in that purity, that clarity, I understand that this is the truth that lies behind everything. This silence, this one silence, between two voices, between two breaths, between two lives. And in this silence, something happens. Your breath slows. Your heart slows. Your thoughts slow. The fear slows. The hurrying slows. The hope slows. And it is not like sadness. It's not like loneliness. It is fulfillment. It is the feeling when you know exactly that you are in the right place at the right time with the right people, or alone with yourself. And that is enough. That is everything. And for these few seconds, you are no longer on a train. You are no longer on a journey. You are no longer in a time. You are simply, you are here. You are alive in a way you never experience in your everyday life. Not in the hurry of the day, not in the fear of the night, but here, in this silence between two tunnels. And I suddenly understand that this is what the mystics seek. This is what the saints feel. This is the realization that time doesn't matter, that the goal doesn't matter, that only this moment counts. This single precious second when the sun touches your face and the world becomes transparent. And then the second tunnel comes. The darkness comes again, and the train enters, and again there is rattling, and again there is fear, and again there is uncertainty, and your heart beats faster again. But you know now that the silence comes. You know now that among all this darkness there is a light. It's not far, it's near. And you breathe in, and you wait for the next silence, for the next moment when the earth speaks to you, when the mountain greets you, when the second stands still. And perhaps, there are more than two tunnels. Perhaps there are infinitely many tunnels and infinitely many moments of silence between them. And perhaps that is life. Tunnels and silence, fear and peace, questions and answers. And each tunnel teaches you that silence comes. Each tunnel teaches you that the light returns. Each tunnel is a test and a promise all at once. And as I sit here, as this train carries me through the night, through the mountains, through my own life, through the tunnels I must traverse, I understand that my life too consists of tunnels and silence, of darkness and light, of fear and peace, of arrivals and departures. And the art is to love the silence, to cherish the silence, to honor the moments between the tunnels, to celebrate them, because they are fleeting and precious and real, and never return, exactly as they were. And I close my eyes, and I hear the wheels, and I hear the wind, and I hear my own heart, and all these sounds together make a symphony, a music that needs no words, a language that is older than the human voice, the language of movement, of travel, of transition. And in that language, I understand that I am not alone, that everyone who ever sat in this train still sits here, in the air, in the rails, in the memory of the mountains. And if I listen carefully, I hear their breaths, their heartbeats, their prayers, as they travel between the tunnels, through the silence, home. And I understand that the silence is not the end, but the beginning of something new, the beginning of understanding, the beginning of seeing yourself in this golden light between two tunnels, and knowing that you live, that you exist, that you are here, and that it is enough. And I sink into this silence, deeper still, into the silence of sleep, where there are no tunnels, only silence, only rest, only peace. and the sun shines on my face. Forever. You see her from a distance before she reaches your compartment. Her uniform is old and new at once, the kind of clothing that survived fashion because it was never fashionable. And in her hands, yes, you see it clearly, she carries 2 keys. The conductor is older, but not bent. She moves through the corridor with a kind of care, as if she knows she's walking along boundaries. Her face is kind, her eyes gentle, yet they see more than you'd credit them with. She sees you, even though she passes directly by you without looking. That's the strange thing about her. She sees you without watching you. The first key she carries is brass, old and polished bright. It shimmers in a warm, amber light. The second key is silver and older, so old it almost seems translucent, as if time has hollowed it out. She holds them both before her, one in each hand, not as if she's about to open something, but as if the keys themselves are things you must see. The passengers in the compartment have grown quiet. A child who was just playing with a toy lets it fall. A woman gazes out the window, but concentrated, as if she's just received a silent instruction from the conductor about what to do. Even you, without knowing why, hold your breath. It's not fear, it's attention. You've never seen the conductor before, you know that for certain. And yet you recognize her straight away, as if she were a figure from a recurring dream, a person you meet each time in the same way, though it's your first time. Her movements are tired and calm at once, the movements of someone who spent decades walking between days, between people who are here and there. Her hands don't tremble, but you see that every finger carries a story. The conductor stops, not at your door, but directly opposite, as if the corridor weren't there. She looks now in your direction, and her eyes are like 2 wells, clear, and in them is reflected everything. Your face, your life, your dreams, your forgetting. The one key, she says softly, and her voice is like the rustle of paper that lay in a drawer for decades, opens the doors of the world. With it, you can go anywhere, see everything, experience everything. She raises the brass-colored key higher, and it glows, as if it had stored the last sun ever to shine over the earth. With this key, you open the present. You nod. You know what she means. This is the key to now, to the place where you live. With it, you can be anywhere, open every door, take any journey. This is the key to the railways, to the roads, to the train you're sitting on now. The key to life, the key to moving forward, the key with which you throw yourself into the next day without knowing what comes, but ready to accept it, because you know it's worth it. But then she shows the other key, the silver one, older. This, she says, and her voice grows even quieter. This key opens doors that were never closed. It opens memories. With it, you can go back in time, into the moments you love, the ones you thought you'd lost. The silver key shimmers, and for a second you see in it, yes, you see it, a room from your childhood, your bed, the window through which moonlight came, your mother singing you a song, your father laughing. You want to stand up, want to reach for the silver key, want to enter that room once more. But the conductor shakes her head, very gently. You can't have both, she says. That's the law of journeys. With the brass key, you live forward. With the silver one, you live backward. And between them there is only sleep. You understand that straight away, even without knowing why you understand it. You can't go into the future and go back into the past at the same time. You can't travel both directions of time simultaneously. You must choose. But the conductor says something else, something so quietly that you're almost not sure she said it or you thought it yourself. In dreams, though, when you sleep, when time becomes strange to itself, there both keys are the same size. there they open the same door. And that's why this train runs at night. That's why you're all here. That's why you fall asleep and don't wake until it's time to remember who you really are. A child asks somewhere on the train, "Can't you just stay where you are?" The conductor smiles toward this voice, though she doesn't see the child. "That's the hardest way," she answers. "That's the way where you lose both keys and have none left." You wonder now whether you've already chosen a key. Perhaps you chose it long ago, on another day, in another journey, and that's why you're sitting in this train now. Because you've already made your choice, and your whole life is the consequence of this choice. The conductor seems to know that. She's not showing you the keys to give you the choice, she's showing you the keys to remind you that you've already made it, that you're already far along the path you've chosen, and this train is just the feeling that you chose rightly. You see how other passengers now open or close their eyes, as if they've finally understood what the conductor showed them. Perhaps she showed them keys too. Perhaps she offered a key to everyone here, and each of you made a choice without knowing it. An old man 2 seats over looks at his hands, as if he could see the keys there, as if he'd made a choice and carries it in him like scars. A young woman stares out the window with tears in her eyes, sad or relieved, and you recognize in her someone who's taken her silver key, who's going back into the past to find herself. And you? You sit here and still don't know which key you hold, and that's all right, because the conductor already knows you've found it. The conductor raises her hand again, and now you pause. She brings both keys together, the brass one and the silver one, and for a brief, wonderful second, they look like one, as if time isn't linear at all, but a circle in which past and future embrace. In sleep, she says, in sleep on a train like this, you suddenly have both keys. And that's the secret of the dream. That's why these trains run at night. That's why people sleep so deeply, so safely here. They open with both keys simultaneously and see that there was only one door. And afterward, they're more whole. She turns and walks further down the corridor. The brass key still glows in memory, but the silver one you still see, though she's no longer holding it. It's as if it's sunk into your chest, there where memory lives. You don't know which key you've chosen. You don't know whether you've already made a choice. But as you think that, as you try to remember when the conductor asked you, or did she ask, you notice it no longer matters. You're sitting in a train, and the conductor with the 2 keys has told you the greatest secret. That at night, on this train, in this gentle space between reality and dream, both realities exist. Past and future sleep beside you, and both open with a key you've always had. I met the Ropemaker on a train along Lake Constance, on the route from Constance to Lindau. It was an autumn afternoon, and the lake lay there like a mirror of lead, grey and still and infinite, and you couldn't tell where the water ended and the sky began. It was all one thing, grey on grey. But it was a beautiful grey, a warm grey, a grey that invited you to sink into it and rest your eyes and think of nothing. He was a small, sturdy man in his late 70s, with hands so strong and rough they looked as though they were plaited from hemp. Broad palms, short fingers, calluses thick as leather. His arms were sinewy and tanned, even now in autumn, as though the sun had burned itself into his skin and refused to leave. He wore work trousers from thick cloth, and a shirt so often washed that it had the color of old rope, a warm, pale brown, that looked like honesty. He looked out at the lake for a long time without saying anything. And then he ran his hand over his palm and said, almost to himself, 50 years. 50 years I've twisted rope, from hemp, from cotton, from sisal, with my hands on the rope walk, back and forth, back and forth. 50 years, and my hands still can't hold still. They're always searching for the thread, for the twist, for the grip. He told me about his rope walk. A long, narrow room, he said, 50 meters long as a rope must be to be any good. In an old shed by the harbor in Langenhagen, where the wind blows in from the lake and smells of water and fish and the nets the fishermen hang to dry. At one end I stand, at the other end there's the wheel, and between us the threads, stretched like the strings of a harp, which I twist and spin and plait, meter by meter, hour by hour, until rope appears from nothing. He explained to me how rope is made. You start with fibers, he said. Individual fibers, thin as hair, weak as grass. Any single one a child could tear. But then you twist them together, 3, 4, 5 fibers into one thread. And you twist the thread with other threads into a strand, and you twist the strands together into a rope. And suddenly you have something in your hand that can hold a ship, that holds an anchor in the storm, that keeps a house together when the wind comes. From nothing, from fibers that individually are nothing, absolutely nothing. But together they're stronger than steel. The secret, he said, is the twist. Each thread is twisted in one direction, and then the threads are twisted together in the opposite direction. That's called the back twist. And that's what holds the rope together. Not glue, not force, not constraint, but the tension between the directions. The threads want to twist back, each for itself, and that very force presses them together. It's the tension that holds, he said, not the relaxation, the tension. Sounds odd, doesn't it? But that's how it is, in rope and in life. It's the opposites that hold us together, the pulling in different directions, which, in the end, ensures nothing falls apart. He told me about the fishermen who buy his rope. Every autumn, he said, they come to me. The old fishermen of Lake Constance, who still go out in their boats and cast their nets by hand. They test the rope, pull at it, smell it, lay it across their hand and feel the twist. And when they nod, when they say, "That's good, that holds," then that's the greatest compliment I can get, because they stake their lives on it, literally. Their boat, their net, their catch, their lives, on my rope. I asked him what rope making had taught him, and he looked at his hands, those strong, rough hands that had twisted so many fibers into so many ropes, and said, "Any single thread breaks. That's the simplest truth I know. One thread alone is nothing. It breaks, it tears, it's good for nothing. But when you connect it with others, when you find the twist, the right tension, the right direction, then something emerges that holds, something that carries, something stronger than any single part. And that's all I know. that we're weak alone, all of us, every one of us. But together, twisted together, held together, tensioned together. Together, we're rope. Together, we can hold ships. He stepped out in Lindau, by the harbor, where the fishing boats bobbed and the seagulls cried, and the lake still lay there, grey and still and endless. Pushed his rough hands into his pockets and walked away, with the broad, steady stride of a man who knows what grip means, who feels it in his hands every day. Any single thread breaks. I carry that sentence with me, in moments when I feel alone, when I think I must carry everything myself. Then I remember the Ropemaker, the twist, the tension that holds, the threads that are nothing alone and everything together. The train travels on, and the rain outside falls like thin threads from the sky. 1,000 threads, weaving themselves with the night. And the rattle turns, steadily, like a rope walk, back and forth, and my eyes grow heavy, and I feel the grip of the train, the grip of the night, the tension that loosens and holds me and carries me deeper and deeper. Look who's sitting beside you. The butterfly catcher from Munich, a woman with nets hanging over her rucksack, with jars full of caterpillar jars in her handbag, with eyes that see everything that flutters and flutters in the Alpine air. She's heading now from Garmisch to Mittenwald, and she carries the whole summer in her bags. Butterflies, small and large, rare and common, all documented in her notebook, all photographed, all counted. She's not a hunter. She doesn't kill, but a researcher, an observer, a collector of images and data. She works for a natural history museum in Munich, and her job is to monitor butterfly populations in the Bavarian Alps, document their distribution, understand their changes over the years. She sits in the meadows with her camera, with her nets, and she observes for hours, sometimes whole days. The butterflies in the Alps aren't numerous, she says, but they're wonderful. There are about 45 species of day butterflies in the higher elevations, and each has its own story, its own preferences, its own secrets. The Alpine Apollo, a white butterfly with red spots, lives only in the highest meadows, in stony areas where almost nothing else grows. The Arnica blue, small, blue, delicate, lives only where the arnica plant grows, and it drinks the nectar of that flower the way a honeybee drinks from a bloom. She knows every name, every flight pattern, every season when each butterfly is active. The emperor butterfly flies in July and August, in forests and forest edges. The Alpine swift flies only late in August, when other butterflies are already gone. The Alpine blue flies only at very high elevations, above 2,000 meters, and only when the weather is warm and sunny. She's learned to read these rhythms like a musician reads a score. Each butterfly has its place in the greater symphony of the seasons. She shows me her camera, a special macro camera that reveals the tiniest details. She has thousands of images, every butterfly photographed individually from different angles under different light. The Alpine Apollo from the 15th of July, 10 o'clock in the morning, at 2,300 meters on a granite stone. The Alpine Swift, a dark, quick butterfly, from the 28th of August on a violet herb plant. The woodland grayling, an inconspicuous brown butterfly that's hard to see, but when you spot it, it's a triumph. The work is microscopic and cosmic at once. She sits and watches a butterfly. How long does it fly? Where does it go? Which flower does it visit? How many other butterflies does she see in an hour? She counts, she documents, she photographs. And all this data together paints a picture of the health of the alpine meadows, abundance or scarcity, stability or change. A butterfly is a small canary in the coal mines of the earth. The caterpillars matter too. They're the larvae, the future of the butterflies, and they're even more particular in their preferences. A caterpillar that becomes an Apollo butterfly feeds only on certain alpine sedum plants, and it's very choosy. It has to find the right plant species, the right size, the right ripeness, or it will starve. This speciality is both a survival advantage — the butterfly has a food source that not many other animals use — and a danger. If the plants disappear, the caterpillars disappear, and with them the butterflies. She also raises butterflies, some of the rarest species, to release them later. She has caterpillars of various kinds, keeps them in special cages with the right food, the right temperature, the right humidity. She watches how the caterpillars grow, how they pupate, how the butterflies emerge, a wonder she's seen hundreds of times and that astonishes her each time. Then, when the butterfly is strong and ready, she releases it into the meadows where it belongs, where it can live, where it can reproduce. This breeding is an insurance against extinction, a thin lifeline if populations in nature become too small. Through this breeding, she's helped rescue 3 species of local populations, butterflies that had almost disappeared from the region. She bred and released, and small populations have established themselves again. It's not a solution to the bigger problem, the change in landscape, the climate, but it helps. It gives the butterflies a chance. It shows that intervention is possible, that people can't only damage nature, but also heal it. What saddens her, she says, is the decline. She has data from 20 years, and in those 20 years, many species have become less common. The Alpine Apollo is rarer, harder to find. The Alpine Swift is also less frequent. And some species have vanished, not dead, not extinct, but gone from this region, withdrawn to higher elevations or no longer present. This has to do with the meadows, with their management, with the climate, with all the complex factors that together create an environment where butterflies can live or cannot. Nature reserves are important, she says, but sometimes not sufficient. Protecting a small zone helps, but if the whole landscape changes, if valley meadows are turned into housing, if pesticides in the lowlands kill insects, then even protected zones have problems. The butterfly knows no boundaries, and the environment isn't compartmentalized. Everything is connected to everything else. She also has a favorite butterfly, the emperor butterfly, a large orange butterfly with black spots. She's not sure why this butterfly matters so much to her, perhaps because it's beautiful, or because it flies too fast, or because it's hard to photograph. But every summer she looks for the emperor butterfly, and when she finds one, she sits still, breathes slowly, and tries to make the perfect picture. The wings in the right position, the light right, the background blurred to isolate the beauty. In the high meadows where she works, she sometimes sits for hours without seeing a butterfly, and then, suddenly, one appears, from nowhere, materializes from the air, and flies past. These moments are, she says, like small miracles, small gifts from the universe. The butterfly doesn't know it's being watched. The butterfly doesn't know its image is being documented for science. The butterfly simply flies, lives its life, the life of a butterfly, a life of days or weeks, and then it's over. But in those short days or weeks, the butterfly accomplishes its whole life, mating, laying eggs, passing its genes to the next generation. Life is short, but it's complete, it's whole. It's not less valuable than human life just because it's shorter. The butterfly catcher has understood this, and this understanding shapes her whole work. That each butterfly matters, that each species counts, that beauty and life and complexity shouldn't be measured in years, but in meaning, in role in the larger ecology, in the beauty it brings to the world. She's also taught, visited schools, shown children the butterflies, explained why they matter, how to protect them. She's distributed caterpillar boxes so children can see the transformation from caterpillar to butterfly themselves. She believes that if children understand the wonder, if they see a butterfly emerge, if they watch a living creature in its total transformation, then perhaps later they'll become conservationists, or at least people who respect nature. She's looking out the train window now at the mountains, and I can see that she's already in the meadows, already looking for butterflies, even now on the train, even while she's speaking with me. Part of her mind is always up there at height, in the flower meadows where the butterflies fly, where the air is pure and the colors glow, where the insects live their lives and die and write their stories in wingbeat. Sleep now, won't you? Dream of butterflies dancing through the air, of the orange emperor butterflies and the blue blues and the white Apollos with their red spots. Dream of how a butterfly emerges, how it dries its wings, how it flies for the first time, and the whole world opens before it, full of color and light and possibility. And it flies on into the mountains, into the meadows, into its short, beautiful life. Look who's sitting next to me. The spring seeker from Valais, a woman in her early 50s with thin brown arms and a smile that knows the secrets of the mountains. She's heading now from Brig to Zermatt, and she's carrying a rucksack full of sample containers and old hand-drawn maps that show where the springs are, the hidden ones that almost no one but her knows about. She's a spring seeker, not in the classical sense, with a divining rod, no, but with knowledge, with scientific precision, with an intuition that only comes from decades. She works for an environmental office in Brig, measures the water quality of Alpine springs, documents their chemistry, their temperature, their flow rate. But that's only half the story. The other half is personal, more beautiful, a legacy that came from her grandmother. Her grandmother was a real spring seeker, the kind who knew where the water was before it came from the earth. She could see from the plants whether a spring was near, certain mosses, certain grasses. She could hear in the birdsong where water existed. And the grandmother taught her granddaughter these abilities, not just as knowledge, but as a way of seeing the world, hearing it, feeling it. She speaks of her grandmother with reverence, an old woman who spent whole summers wandering in the mountains, simply knowing where the springs were, the best ones, the purest, the springs that healed. The springs she seeks aren't simply water. They're oases, sanctuaries, places where the earth itself makes a gift. Some are very small, just a trickle on the rock that slowly gathers into a tiny stream. Others are larger, cold and clear, like liquid light. And each spring has its own personality. Some are quick, bubbling, lively. Others are still, meditative, ancient. The spring seeker reads these personalities like words. She shows me her maps, quite old, hand-drawn by her grandmother in ink and color, with names and numbers and dates. Spring number 47, the spring of 3 stones. A spring beneath a rock face where 3 large stones always lie like a signature. Spring number 91, the singing spring. A spring that flows through small cracks in the rock and sings like a bird. Spring number 23, the Alpine mother spring. A spring that's warm, not cold, unusual, as if the earth itself were breathing. These numbers and names are a lexicon from many generations. Her grandmother had already documented springs, and her grandmother before her. The spring seeker is the latest in a long line of women who read the Alps like a sacred book, who knew where life comes from, where water flows, where the earth gives up its secrets. She's the continuity, the bridge between the old way and scientific precision. And this bridge matters because it shows that knowledge comes in many forms, in numbers and in myth, in science and in intuition, in maps and in memory. The work is spiritual and practical at once. She measures pH, mineral content, temperature, water hardness. But as she measures, she speaks to the water. She thanks it for its purity, for its patience, for the fact that it's there, that it flows, that it gives life. She understands the springs as living beings, not metaphorically, but truly. The water has a velocity, a rhythm, a way of being, and this way of being should be respected. The springs are also indicators of climate change. They dry up, or their chemistry changes, or the temperature rises. She's documented how springs that once flowed year-round now run dry in summer. Springs that once were icy are now cold, but no longer icy. She sees the subtle changes. A spring that once smelled of snow now smells of earth. That's because of less snow up there, less meltwater from the heights, less of that icy purity that snow brings to the water. There are also springs emerging newly. The permafrost is melting, and new water sources are opening where only frozen rock used to be. It's as if the earth were reinventing itself, she says, finding new ways to share its water. These new springs are interesting too. Their chemistry is different, their taste is different, and they have no history, no old continuity. They're young and changeable, like newborns who don't yet know who they are. She has a routine in summer. Every day she visits one or two new springs or returns to the old ones to repeat the measurements. She walks to the places with her rucksack, and sometimes it takes hours to reach a particular spring, hiking through steep terrain, over streams, through dense herb fields. And when she arrives, she sits beside the spring, is silent for a while, and then she begins her work. Sitting by the spring isn't just respect, it's also communication. She sits and listens for differences in the water's sound, understands in the song of the water whether it's pure or burdened, whether it comes from snow or from rain, whether it's young or old. The water speaks, she says, if you listen. And she's learned to understand this language, not with scientific instruments alone, but with her senses, with her body, with all her attention. The science documents, the listening understands. She also tells of times when she got lost, when she couldn't find the spring, even though she had her grandmother's map, even though she knew the description. It's as if the spring sometimes doesn't want to be found, she says, as if it hides, waits. And then, on another day, when she wasn't looking for it, when she was just walking, suddenly the spring was there, bubbling, as if to say, I was always here, you just didn't look right. The measurements themselves are poetic. She takes samples, fills tiny bottles with water, writes on small labels the temperature, the pH, the color, the taste. Yes, she tastes the water, just a small sip, because the taste gives information too, because the human body is a sensitive instrument, more sensitive sometimes than chemicals and measuring devices. Calcareous water tastes different from granite water. Water from lead ore has a metallic taste. Pure snow water is sweet, sweet as innocence. The other side of her work is protection. Many of the springs lie on private land, and the owners don't know they have jewels on their property. She speaks with them, tells them about the spring, about its significance, and sometimes, if the owners are interested, she helps them protect the spring, build a small well, create paths. She also has contact with the government, with environmental agencies who use her data to understand how alpine water systems work, how they can be protected. Sometimes she also carries water from the springs home. Not much, just a small bottle, and she drinks it during winter when she's sitting at home in Brig. She says it reminds her of the springs, of the mountains, of the summers at height. It's also a kind of continuity. The spring stays with her even when she's not there. The water remains a presence in her life, a constant reminder of the task, of the beauty, of the importance of listening and protecting. She's looking out the window now at the valleys passing by, and I see that she's reading an inner map I can't see. She's thinking of the springs that are somewhere out there in the heights, that flow, that wait, that send out their calls, small, secret calls, to those who know how to listen. She'll head up when the train arrives. She'll take her rucksack and she'll visit her springs, one after another, a pilgrimage in the service of water, in the service of the earth. Sleep now, won't you? Dream of cool, clear water bubbling from the earth, of springs that are secret and mysterious, of 3 stones and the singing spring, of the Alpine mother's spring that's warm like a hand. Dream of how you find a spring far away in the mountains, and you drink from it, and suddenly you understand the whole story, the story of water, the story of the earth, the story of time itself. Look who's sitting here. The shepherdess and her sheep, the herdswoman from Bad Reichenhall with her crook and her experienced hands that know hundreds of animals, each one by name. She's heading up now into the Berchtesgaden Alps, where her summer pastures are, where her sheep have grazed all summer long for generations in a rhythm older than the railway itself. She's got perhaps 180 sheep, meat sheep, she says, not for wool, though the wool's valuable too. It's got long hair, good for hand weavers, for those who still make traditional cloth. She knows each animal. She's got names for all the important ones, the mothers, the leaders, the ones that are always causing trouble. She shows me a picture on her phone, her herd on a green meadow, 180 specks of white and gray and brown, and she points them out. Marta, the large one with the black patches, Greta, who always runs away, Hilda, the grandmother, who always finds the best grazing spot. The journey up into the Alps is an annual tradition. In spring, when the valley meadows are exhausted, when the lambs are big enough, she drives the herd upward. It takes 2 days from Bad Reichenhall to the high pastures, and along the way they camp on meadows where other herders with other flocks camp too, an old tradition that still lives. She's got 2 herding dogs, large, intelligent German shepherds that keep the herd together, that know where the sheep are before she does. This migration is a kind of procession. 180 sheep, slowly, always slowly, on narrow paths, over bridges, through villages where people stand and watch, as if she were bringing a piece of the past back into the modern world. The young lambs are nervous, bleating, but the old sheep know the way. They've perhaps done it 20 times. And they lead the young ones. Cowbells ring when the sheep move, and that's a sound that's echoed in the mountains for hundreds of years, unchanging, soothing. The work is physically hard. She must count the herd every morning, make sure no sheep are lost, that none are sick, that the lambs are still with their mothers. In the summer months, she has to walk across the meadows, guiding the sheep to better grazing, keeping them from the forest where predators live. Lynxes have come back to the Alps after 100 years away, and the herders must be vigilant, must protect their flocks. She sleeps in a hut, alone with the dogs, and wakes to the sounds of night, to the bleating of sheep, to the howling of the wind. The hut isn't luxurious. A roof, 4 walls, a stove for colder nights, a bed of straw or feathers, a table for meals. She cooks herself with what she has. Potatoes, cheese, bread, sometimes meat. The groceries are brought up once a week by a man with a donkey. Yes, still with a donkey, because machines can't get everywhere, because what's oldest is often what's best. She reads in the hut, too. Old books she reads again and again, or she listens to the radio when reception is good, a thin connection to the world down below, which she might quite forget if she weren't so grounded. She's not young anymore. She's 66, she says, and she's been doing this job for 40 years. Her father was a herder too, and his father before him. It's a family profession, a calling that sits in the bones. She never married. The mountains and the sheep were enough. She didn't need another family. Sometimes, she says, when she's alone in the Alps, under the stars, when the whole world is asleep, she doesn't feel lonely, but present, alive. More than when at home in the city. What becomes of this work when she can't do it anymore? The shepherdess wonders. But not with fear, just with quiet realism. The young people in the valleys don't want this work anymore. Too hard, too lonely, too little pay. The last herders are dying out, and the pastures lose their management, grow wild, become overgrown, lose the plant diversity maintained by sheep herds. She has a niece who's interested. Maybe the niece will come, but she doesn't know. Yet she continues the work year after year because it's the right thing, because the sheep need it, because the mountains need it, because the tradition needs it. Bottle feeding the lambs is an important part of her work. Not all lambs have a mother. Not all mothers can give enough milk. She carries 2 or 3 bottles with special milk, and every morning she has to feed the weak lambs by hand, a gentle, motherly gesture she's made 1,000 times, always with the same care. She tells me about a lamb this year that's particularly tender, particularly sweet, Ketha, that she might take home when the grazing season ends, because she can't bring herself to take it to the butcher. The mountains are changing in her eyes, too. Every year she sees how the meadows shift, how new plants arrive, how the snow melts earlier, how the pasture season gets shorter. She has to drive the sheep up earlier and bring them down earlier. The vegetation's different, too. Where certain herbs used to grow, others grow now, and she's learned which grasses are good for the sheep, which they should avoid, which are poisonous. The herding dogs are like her children. They're called Max and Bella, and Max is old, nearly the same age as her in dog years. He probably won't see another winter, and that frightens her because she doesn't know how she'll manage the herd without Max, without this partner who's been with her for 15 years, who reads her thoughts, who knows the sheep like she does. Bella's younger, only 5, but Bella has Max as her teacher, and she's learning fast. She'll be ready when the time comes. She's also a storyteller. She knows the Alps like a book. Every curve, every stone, every waterfall has a story. She tells of the storm 3 years ago that nearly lost her the herd, how the sheep panicked, how they all wanted to flee, how she and Max worked for hours to hold them together, to drive them into the hut. She tells of the fox that tried to take a lamb and how she drove it off with her crook and shouts. She tells of the gentian fields that have disappeared over the years and of the mosses that grow ever greener. The meat quality of her sheep is good. She breeds for flavor, for the marbling of the flesh, for the conditions under which the animals grow. The sheep that graze freely in the Alps, fed on grass and herbs, not grain, that know the air and the vastness, their muscles are different. Their flavor is more intense, more true. She has a butcher in Bad Reichenhall who buys her lambs and restaurants that cook with them, and she's proud of the quality, of the tradition that sits in every piece of flesh. She's looking out the train window now at the mountains growing closer, and I see in her eyes something that looks like home, a deep familiarity with this land. She can't spend long in the city. After just 2 or 3 weeks, when the herd must stay behind in the valley, she gets nervous, sleeps poorly, dreams of the meadows, of the sound of the cowbells, of the wind that blows only at those heights. Sleep now, won't you? Dream of green meadows and 180 white sheep, of the herding dogs protecting the flock, of the cowbells ringing in the silence, of the sun on the mountains, and of Marta and Greta and Hilda the grandmother, who always finds the best spot. Dream of the shepherdess standing alone under the stars, and not feeling lonely but at home, truly at home. Do you see the woman with the sketchbook in her lap? That's the Alpine plant painter from Imst. She's heading back to Innsbruck now from the Brenner, her bags full of dried flowers and sketches in charcoal and paint. The whole summer through, she sits in meadows and alpine pastures with brush and magnifying glass, painting the tiniest flowers of the Alps, the way you'd stitch jewels onto black velvet. Her hands are brown again from the light and the work, her nails stained with plant juice. She shows me the latest pieces, still not quite dry. An edelweiss that looks like a small star, each silver hair applied individually. An alpine rose, not simply pink or red, but a whole universe of color tones, from the palest white to the deepest magenta. Each flower is a small page from a great poem the mountains are speaking. She's been doing these summers for 30 years. Every June she heads up into the heights where most people scarcely venture, where the air grows thin and the flowers must hurry, cramming everything they are into just a few weeks. She says she tries to understand this urgency, to paint the desperation in every flower cup, as if she wants to hold back time itself with each brush stroke. The alpine plants know it won't last long, that snow will come, and so they're so intense in their color, so precious, so wonderfully precise in their shape. She talks about the work on fine details, how you paint the stamens of a bog rosemary, a flower that grows at heights of 2,000 meters and smells of moor, bitter and old. Or the tiny, barely visible flowers of alpine heath. They're gray, almost invisible against the stone, but when you paint them, you suddenly see their secret. A rose tint here, a violet line there, an almost human delicacy. She had a magnifying glass with her, she says, a 10-fold magnifier, and with that glass the world became different. Suddenly, tiny worlds were visible, structures that only revealed themselves under magnification. The botanists know her, she says with a laugh. She's done illustrations for 3 different alpine plant field guides. Her works are in museums, in universities, in private collections. But what fills her most is not the recognition, but the simplicity of the task. To see a flower, truly see it. Not as a botanist with categories and classifications, but as an artist trying to capture the wonder of something so small and fleeting. Her daughters are grown now, she says. The youngest is 45. They accompanied their mother as children these summers long into the heights, into the meadows. They learned to see the flowers, to understand the forms, to call them by name. And now, as the mother grows older, the daughters sometimes come along, help with the heavy rucksacks, sit beside her while she paints. A kind of quiet passing on, not just of knowledge, but of attention, of this particular way of seeing the world, one flower at a time. In May, she heads up to the meadows, when snowdrops are still tucked beneath melting snow, when you have to dig for them like treasure. In June come the alpine roses, the arnica, the soldanelle, that lovely violet flower that blooms beneath the snow, its warmth melting through the white layer to reach the sun. In July, the dwarf pine plains open up, and there's a riot of color, green, yellow, orange, blue, all at once, all desperate, all beauty against time. By August, it becomes sparse but more intense. The late bloomers, the gentians with their almost black flowers, and the little red fescue flowers, red like fire. She sits for hours in one spot, her sketchbook in her lap, the flower right in front of her, and paints. Not quickly, slowly, with all her attention, with all her senses. She breathes in the air that smells of height and greenness and stone. She hears the marmots whistle, the eagles circle above the peaks. She feels the sun and the wind and the dampness of earth beneath her knees. And she paints, with all that presence in her brushstrokes. There are sad flowers too, she says, the ones that used to be everywhere and that she can't find anymore. The lady's slipper orchid, the rare and delicate one with its burgundy and white striped cup. She's found only 2 or 3 in recent years, where she used to find fields of them. The alpine mallow, the small tender mallow with its violet flowers, that's become rare too. She paints these as well, these rare ones, these vanishing ones, and there's a note of urgency in her brush, a hint of color that says, I must hold you now, because I don't know if you'll still exist soon. The colors, she says, aren't shop-bought. She makes many herself from plants, from minerals, from earth she collects. A red earth from a slope in Tyrol gives a particular red, not like cadmium red, but warmer, older, almost like rusty iron. Green earth from the valley meadows gives a green that's alive, not sap green, but the green of a plant growing in poor soil, concentrated, intense. She mixes and experiments, and each picture is not just a representation, but also a chemical story, a story of stone and plants that give color. What she's done this summer is also a response to what she sees, the changes. Flowering times are shifting. Plants that used to grow only at higher elevations are now found lower down. Other plants are disappearing. The extreme alpines, the specialists, those that can only survive in cold. they're retreating backwards into the heights, like refugees fleeing warmth. She paints more intensely, more consciously, knowing that some of these flowers she's painting now might not bloom in these places a few decades hence. Her hands are artist's hands, but also naturalist's hands. She can draw a flower so you see the exact arrangement of the stamens, but also paint it so you feel the poetry that lives in this small bloom. She's an illustrator and artist, but also a documentarian, someone who says, look at the beauty here. See what's small, see what's fleeting, and hold it fast, if only in color and form. She shows me a picture of Edelweiss, in watercolor, very delicate, the silver hairs applied with tiny silver highlights. She's done hundreds of watercolors of Edelweiss, she says, because each flower is different, each has its own character. That's the secret people don't understand, she says. There are no two flowers exactly alike, not really, not when you look closely. Variations in size, in shape, in the intensity of coloring, in the arrangement of the leaves, endless differences in what seems a uniform form. The train's moving through the Brenner region now, and she's gazing out at the mountains she's just left, the meadows still glowing with the late flowers of summer. She'll rest, let the pictures dry, stretch them in frames, catalog them, sell them, or give them away. But already she's planning next summer. Already she's thinking of the new heights, the new meadows, the new tiny flowers she'll paint before they fade. In her sketchbook, too, are notes, words she's written in, the size of the flower, the date, the exact height, the name of the place. A gentian from the 18th of July at 2,400 meters east of the Brenner Pass. A bog rosemary from the 10th of June in a high moor south of Brenner. These notes are like coordinates in time and space. They mark not only where and when she painted the flower, but where that flower exists, where you can go to find it yourself, to see the wonder with your own eyes. Sleep now, won't you? Dream of the silver flowers and the meadows full of color, of the Edelweiss and the Alpine rose, and the tiny soldano that blooms beneath the snow. Dream of summer in the heights, of the brush strokes that catch the light, of the beauty so small and so fleeting that it can only live on in color and form, here on the paper, forever. Forever. Look out the window, would you? There she sits, the woman with her instruments in her rucksack, the Glacier Researcher from Davos. She's only just left her station, where since June she's been documenting the retreat curve of the Oberar Glacier. New measurements every day, new data, the story of an icy landscape saying its goodbyes. She speaks about the glacier the way you'd speak of a dying friend, with knowledge, with tenderness, and with a kind of grief that runs deep. The Oberar isn't just any glacier. It's one of the most carefully measured in the Alps, documented since 1910, meter for meter, year after year. And in the last 20 years, it's retreated nearly 1.5 kilometers, a slow, unstoppable flight. Her work is like that of a doctor taking the mountain's pulse. With her steel measuring instruments, her ropes and ice axes, she climbs into regions where the air grows thin and the sun doesn't linger long. She marks points on the ice with GPS coordinates, photographs crevasses that grow deeper year after year, collects drill samples from the depths. Each layer tells a story of snowfall, of pressure, of time transformed into ice. The glacier, she says, is a history book written in crystals. The air bubbles in every layer contain the atmosphere from back then. You can smell what the air smelled like 100 years ago, she says, with a smile that's somehow tinged with melancholy. The white bands are years with heavy snow. The dark ones are years when dust from the Sahara blew all the way to the Alps. And now, in these summer months, she sees daily how the ice melts. From above, it looks like a gentle fading, but up close, it's dramatic, desperate, the crevasses opening like cries. The science is very precise, she says. but the emotions are precise too. She measures the melt rate, roughly 2 meters a year, and she feels the weight of it in her chest. She sees the moraine shift, those dark stones the glacier pushes ahead of it like a plow, and she knows exactly what it means. Every stone is a broken promise, a piece of the Ice Age returning to the world, altered, rough, stripped of its frozen beauty. She showed me her camera, hundreds of photos from the same spot, taken at the same angle, year after year. You can see how the moraine, that dark line of stone at the edge, slowly migrates downward, how the snow-covered area shrinks, how bare earth emerges again, gray and scarred, land that lay beneath ice for millennia. It's like punishment in fast forward, she says, without sarcasm, just with the clarity of someone who reads numbers the way others read faces. The measurement data she collects feeds into global climate models. Her work has a reach that goes far beyond a single glacier. The Oberar is part of a great mosaic of data showing how quickly the world is changing. And yet, she says, it's always personal too. She knows this glacier. She's seen it in different seasons. She's stood on its ice when the sun paints the crevasses sapphire blue and the wind swirls the snow dust in spirals. This summer she brought along an assistant, a young girl studying geology, curious and with fear in her eyes. She shows the girl how to move in the crevasses, how to secure a safety rope, how to measure ice thickness, with radar and with intuition, she says. The intuition comes from years, from hundreds of days on this ice, from a body that's learned to feel the subtle shifts. In the hut by the glacier, large, red, a refuge for researchers, she drinks her hot chocolate at night and writes her notes. The thermometers show night temperatures that these days don't drop below freezing anymore, not even at 3,600 meters. That's new, she says, new and frightening. The permafrost is melting, the rocks become unstable, scree fields that have been still for millions of years are beginning to flow. She told me about her first expedition, 25 years ago, as a doctoral student, full of idealism and strength. The glacier was thicker then, more solid, more majestic. Back then, she could allow herself to ignore the future. The scientific models already looked grim, but the mountains themselves, in their immediate presence, seemed eternal. She knows better now. Nothing's eternal. Not in the Alps. Not anymore. The summer sun in the mountains is intense and swift. Between 7 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon, the ice melts visibly. You can hear it, she says, the water flowing through the crevasses and channels, rushing softly, as if the mountain were weeping. In the evening it refreezes, but not as strongly, not the way it used to. The rhythms are shifting. What sustains her, she told me, is curiosity. The question of how the ice works, how water flows through the depths, where the ground moraine begins, what bacteria live in the glacier lakes. The questions give her reason to set out each morning, gather her instruments, summon her strength. The glacier is dying, yes, but it's still there, still full of secrets, and she'll uncover them for as long as she can. Beneath the ice, she says, water flows through invisible channels, rivers of meltwater plunging through the dark vaults of the glacier torrent. You hear them, but you don't see them, yet they shape the landscape, carving out valleys, transporting millions of tons of rubble down into the lowlands. The glacier isn't rigid, it's alive, dynamic, it breathes with the seasons. And in its final days it breathes faster, more desperately, as if it has something to say to the world before silence comes. She's watching out the train window now, seeing the ridges and valleys of the Albula region slip past, and I can tell she has thoughts that stretch far beyond this moment. She sees into every height, into the folds of the rock, the traces of the great glaciers of the ice ages that shaped everything here. The history of the Alps is the history of ice masses, she says. And the future? The future isn't written yet, but it's already being shaped by every gram of carbon dioxide the factory releases, by every car that drives past. What she does through these summers, the measurements, the drill samples, the daily observations, That's a kind of love too, I think. A love for something that's mortal, that's coming to an end. She's not just documenting data, she's documenting farewell. Every photograph is a memory, every measurement a meeting with something that keeps slipping away. And yet she comes back every year, packs her instruments, climbs into the cold and height, to see again, to measure again, to bear witness again. At night, when the train passes through Graubünden, she's probably thinking of the nights in the hut, the sound of ice breaking, echoing like thunder through the crevasses, the northern lights that sometimes are visible even this far south, the silence that feels infinite when you're standing alone on an island of ice. The glacier speaks in those nights, she says, and whoever listens understands the language of time. Her assistant, that young girl with fear in her eyes, will probably one day lead such measurements herself in a world with fewer glaciers, faster melting ones, darker seeming ones. And perhaps then she'll remember these summers, the Oberar as it was still then, dense and blue and full of frozen time. Perhaps she'll carry her own grief, her own responsibility, documenting things before they disappear entirely. Sleep now, won't you? Dream of the blue crevasses and starlight on the ice, of crystals millions of years old, and the measurements still to be taken, the data still to be gathered, until the sun of the glaciers sets, until the mountain finds itself again, new, changed, but still glowing, still here. And somewhere in this dark landscape, I thought still others sleep in their beds, in their houses, and the moon looks down on them, and the moon looks down on us, and everything is in its place. The fields are in their place, the forests are in their place, the rivers are in their place, and I am in mine, here in this wagon, here in this warm cradle of wood and cloth and metal that carries me where I need to go, without my needing to be awake, without my needing to do anything except trust and rest. I'm an old man, and I've seen much during my time on the railways. But no one has brought me peace quite like the herb woman I met on the line between Passau and Regensburg. People called her the witch. No harm meant, you understand. Simply because she was so old, white as snow, and because she knew healing herbs, plants that nobody else seemed to know. Ludwiga was about 90 years old, or perhaps even older. I couldn't quite say for certain. She looked as though she didn't quite belong to this world. She always wore a dark dress from a flea market, surely from 50 years back, and a cloth bound about her head. Her hands were gnarled, like tree roots, and when she moved them as she spoke, they reminded you of branches bending in the wind. She'd get out at Passau and walk into the Bavarian forest, into mountains that were dark and ancient. There she gathered herbs, not just for sale, you understand, but because it was her life, because the herbs belonged to her the way children belong to a mother. She told me once on a platform, we had time as the train was delayed, that herbs were mankind's first medicine. Before there were pharmacies, before there were doctors, there were herbs. An old woman who knew the herbs was as important as the priest. She could heal fever, heal wounds, heal pain. Ludwiga was the last of that line, the last who still knew which herb was good for which ailment. The knowledge was in her head, and when she died, it would be lost. The Bavarian forest. It's not simply a forest. It's an entire world, dense and mysterious. Ludwiga knew the plants that grew there the way a musician knows musical notes. The lily of the valley, poisonous, but if you process it correctly, it can strengthen the heart. Lungwort, pulmonaria. The leaves look like diseased lungs, but the herb heals real lungs of their infections. Greater celandine, chelidonium. The orange-yellow sap in folk medicine made warts disappear, though modern medicine didn't understand it. She showed me once a dried plant that I took for dead wood. But no, it was St. John's wort, Hypericum perforatum, dried out. She took a leaf and held it to the light, and there you could see it, tiny transparent spots like little windows. Those were the oil glands containing the active ingredient. St. John's wort was good for depression, she said, but only if you dosed it correctly and only if you treated the whole person, not just the symptom. A tea, 3 cups a day for at least 3 months. That was the patient's herbs required. Ludwika showed me her drying shed too, an old wooden building beside her house, sweetly fragrant with dried herbs. Hundreds of bundles hung from the ceiling, tied and labeled in pencil. The fennel with its delicate fronds, the thyme with its fine granular quality, the nettles, the yarrow, the arnica, the valerian. Each had its place, its name, its season. She harvested each herb at exactly the right time, not too early when they were weak, not too late when they'd grown woody, but precisely in the middle of the season when their strength was greatest. She worked without modern equipment, no machines, no electric drying, just the sun, just the air, just time. The herbs dried naturally, slowly, in the shed where the air could circulate. It took 2 or 3 weeks, sometimes longer, but the result was an herb with full aroma, full potency. The industry dries quickly with heat, and that destroys the delicate oils, the healing powers. Ludwika knew this, and she did it properly. Her customers came from everywhere. A doctor from Regensburg who bought her tinctures for patients who couldn't tolerate antibiotics. A pharmacist from Passau who sold her dried herbs in her shop under the name Forest Herbs from Ludwika. A couple of weavers who used her plants for dyeing. The woad blue came from the woad plant, the yellow from dyer's weld, the red from madder root. Each herb was a dye, a way of using nature without destroying it. Ludwika spoke, too, of the dangers, that one couldn't simply pick any herb at random. Hemlock, with its spotted stems, looks harmless enough, but it's deadly poison. Oleander can be a pretty houseplant, but eat it and you die. She knew the differences between the poisonous and the healing plants, and she was strict. She wouldn't give an herb to someone who might dose it wrongly and come to harm. She set out guidelines, wrote instructions in a little notebook, issued warnings. She showed me her apothecary cabinets, too, old wooden cupboards with hundreds of tiny drawers, each with a labeled handle. Every drawer held a different medicine, tinctures, salves, oils, dried leaves, calendula oil for wounds, arnica oil for bruises, valerian tincture for sleeplessness. She made the tinctures herself, plants steeped in high-proof alcohol, left for weeks until the active ingredients were drawn out. A few drops of valerian tincture, 3 drops in warm water before bed. That was enough to soothe the most stubborn sleeplessness. Ludwika explained, too, the making of salves, a process requiring great care. You took the dried herbs, ground them finely, stirred them into warm oil, sunflower or sesame. Then you let it stand several days while the active substances passed into the oil. Then you strained out the herb and mixed the oil with beeswax, which you gently warmed. The right consistency, not too hard, not too soft, was the key. A good salve would keep for months, would heal the skin, would make old wounds fade. Ludwika kept handwritten recipes, page after page, all memorized, but also written down for the future. In spring came the time for gathering flowers, the delicate blooms of the forest flowers, arnica, violets, wild pansies, wild strawberry. These flowers were subtle, with aromas that were fleeting. Ludwika dried them very quickly, right after gathering, to preserve their fragrance. She made flower teas that tasted like nectar, that opened the heart. She said that flower herbs were warmer than leaf herbs, more energetic, more alive. That was old knowledge, she said, the knowledge of nature itself. She told me, too, of her own teacher, another woman, even older than Ludwika herself, who had passed on the arts of herb healing. This woman was long dead, but Ludwika remembered every detail, how she had gathered plants with respect and gratitude, always taking only half so the plant could continue living. How she had watched the moon phases. Certain herbs should be gathered at full moon, others at new moon. That wasn't superstition, Ludwika said. It was observed truth. The energy of plants showed cycles just like all life. And whoever understood these cycles, whoever worked with them instead of against them, could work wonders with the herbs. I asked her once whether she wasn't afraid of the future, afraid that her knowledge would be lost. She laughed softly and said no. They couldn't take the knowledge from her because it lived in her, because it flowed through her hands, through her understanding. And when she died, perhaps the knowledge would remain in the plants themselves, waiting for someone to discover it again. Nature doesn't lose its knowledge, she said. Man simply loses the ability to listen. I still travel this route between Passau and Regensburg, and I look out the window at the forests where Ludwika gathered her herbs. Perhaps she no longer lives, I don't know. But her knowledge lives on in those she taught, and it lives in the plants themselves. Every time spring comes, every time the flowers bloom again, somewhere or other hands, old hands or young, are gathering healing herbs, and the old knowledge remains alive. Let yourself sink into this ancient forest, where the herbs grow, where the hands of herb women gather, where every leaf has a story, a healing, a secret, and everything is nature, and everything is old, older than words, older than fear, just depth and stillness and green, green life. I'd like to tell you about a beekeeper, a woman I saw several times on the route between Würzburg and Aschaffenburg. She always carried a basket with her, and if you listened carefully, very carefully indeed, you could hear it, the humming of her bees, even when the train was moving fast. Her name was Petra, and she ran a small apiary on the forest edge, about 3 kilometers from Aschaffenburg station. Not many hives, mind you, perhaps 15 or 20, but they were everything to her. She knew every single colony the way a father knows his children, knew each queen, knew their peculiar ways. She'd come on this route 2 or 3 times a week to visit her apiary, to check on her bees, to harvest honey, to follow the unfolding of new generations. Spring was the best time, the time of increase, of hope, of blossom. The hives stood at the forest edge, right where the flowers began. That wasn't by chance, you see. A good beekeeper places his hives in dappled shade, where the morning and evening sun reaches, but not the harsh strength of midday. And the closeness to the forest mattered, not just for shelter from the wind, but for the flowering plants. In spring, beneath the trees came the crocuses, the snowdrops, then the cowslips and violets. Then the forest itself, the maples, the linden, the robinias, later the spruces and firs. All year long there were blossoms, and the bees could gather nectar. Petra told me that beekeeping wasn't really about the honey. That's what most people thought, but they were wrong, she said. The honey was the product, the byproduct. The beekeeper's work was to keep the colony healthy and strong. A strong colony makes good honey, survives the winter, starts afresh in spring. Modern beekeeping, she said, was too focused on profit, on how much honey you could squeeze out. That was all wrong. You had to put the bees themselves at the center. In spring, the brood development was everything. The queen laid thousands of eggs a day, and from these came larvae that needed feeding. The workers, and every worker bee was female, did this job with a kind of precision that bordered on the obsessive. They warmed the brood, they fed the larvae on royal jelly, a special secretion rich with goodness. And if an egg wasn't viable, if a larva fell ill, the bees knew it somehow, and they cleaned it away. Perfect sanitation inside the hive, an instinct older than civilization itself. Petra always carried a small bag with her, a sort of kit containing everything she needed. A smoker, which she'd light before opening the hives. The smoke calmed the bees, made them docile. A steel scraper to open the wax frames, a cage for the queen if she needed to be contained. Little bottles with various treatments, salt for the varroa mite that parasitizes the bees, homeopathic remedies I didn't understand. She was a craftsperson, a practitioner, not an academic scientist. But her science was one of observation, of learning through 100 generations of bees. She described to me the different forms of pollen the bees collected. The orange-red pollen from crocus blooms, the yellowish from saffron crocus, the dark brown-black from chestnut trees. Each had its signature, and the bees knew which flowers made the best honey. In May, when the robinias flowered, the honey would be pale and mild. That was the height of it. In summer, when everything bloomed together, the honey grew darker and more complex. In autumn, when the asters and goldenrod flowered, it became dark, nearly black. Petra made different honeys depending on when she harvested. She spoke, too, about the secret of the queen, why one queen leads, why the workers obey her. The queen emits pheromones, chemical signals that coordinate the whole colony. These pheromones tell the workers, all is well, there is a mother here, carry on with your work, build the brood, gather the nectar. When the queen grows old, when her pheromone signal weakens, the colony grows restless. The workers understand that change is necessary. They build cells for a new queen. The new queen is born, and there is a battle. Often, only one queen can survive. That's the nature of bees, brutal and efficient. In spring, all of this was very intense. Petra had to check regularly whether her colonies had enough space. If a queen was too successful, if the colony grew too strong, then Petra had to catch swarms or divide the colonies. A swarm, that's when the bees decide to emigrate, is spectacular. Suddenly, tens of thousands of bees pour out of the hive and search for a new home. Petra showed me once a video on her phone of a swarm settling on a branch. It was like a living, breathing cloud, brown and humming and alive. She'd caught it in her basket and settled them into a new hive. That was the magic of beekeeping, to found an entire colony, to start a whole new life. Petra wasn't young anymore. She was well into her 60s, perhaps older. Her hands were rough and scarred from years of stings, from working with wood and wax and metal. But her eyes were bright and awake when she spoke of her bees. She said she didn't know what she'd do without the apiary. The bees needed her, and she needed the bees. It was a mutual bond, deeper and older than most human friendships. Every year, when spring came, when the bees woke from their winter sleep, Petra woke too, with new courage and new hope. She told me too of the enemies of bees, not just the varroa mite, but birds, wasps, badgers if they happened to be in the district. But the greatest enemy was mankind, through pesticides, monocultures, the destruction of flowering plants. A bee station without wildflowers was a station in danger. That's why Petra's forest edge was so important. The forest offered diversity, offered blossoms all year long. She described how she actively tended the forest, cutting old shrubs to encourage new growth, sowing seed patches to create more flowers. The forest and the apiary weren't separate. They were one living thing. One particular thing fascinated Petra especially: the nectar flows and their timing. She'd learned to predict the nectar flows based on temperature, rain, and day length. A week of rain followed by sunshine, that would bring a great nectar flow. The bees would become extremely active then, gathering and storing nectar at a great pace. Petra had to be quick, managing the frames to prevent the colonies from becoming too full and swarming. She kept detailed records of temperature, weather, and honey yield, an entire archive of 2 decades, which she showed me. The data was clear. The nectar flows were becoming less reliable, less intense. The climate had grown too dry, too unpredictable. She asked me once whether I ate honey. I said yes, of course. Then she gave me a small jar, her honey, from her apiary. It wasn't like the honey from the supermarket. It was dark gold, almost amber-colored, and when you tasted it, you could taste the flowers, could taste the story. Every spoonful was the work of thousands of bees, their dances, their navigation, their tireless gathering. That's what Petra did. She translated the life of bees into something humans could understand. Now, as the train carries us along, As we travel this route between Würzburg and Aschaffenburg, I imagine Petra out there with her bees. It's spring, and the queens are laying eggs, and the brood is growing. Somewhere at the forest edge, in those hives, an entire world is at work, a whole colony busy with its purpose. Life continues, quite regardless of whether we humans notice it or not. Let yourself sink into this warming world, where the bees fly, where the humming is a melody, an old melody, older than the railway, older than mankind, and the flowers bloom, and the honey flows, and everything is nature, and everything is time and patience and love. Let me tell you about the moss researcher, a woman I met on the Tarrant to Dresden line. She's always on her knees, the people in the village say, but that's not quite right. She's searching for a world most people never see because they never look down. Ursula was her name, and she was a bryologist, a moss researcher who devoted herself to nothing less than a complete inventory of the moss flora of the Saxon forests. She'd get off the train in Tarrant and always go into the forest next to the station, a mixed forest of beeches, spruces, and oaks standing on acidic granite soil. This soil, this acidic forest floor, was perfect for mosses. Hundreds of species, perhaps thousands if you counted all the variations. And Ursula knew them all, or almost all, personally. Most people see moss as something green that grows at the base of trees, and that's all. They don't think that there's structure, order, that there are hundreds of different species living together like a community. Ursula carried a small magnifying glass in her waistcoat pocket, not to see the moss, you could see that without magnification, but to really understand it, to grasp the fine leaf structures, the nerves and cell patterns that made each species unmistakable. She knew Hypnum cupressiform, Dicranum scoparium, Platygerium repens, Thuidium tamaricinum, an entire taxonomy, an entire universe, small and hidden. She told me once that moss was the best indicator of a forest's health. Not the large trees, not the visible flora, the moss. A forest with rich moss flora is a forest that's balanced, where the microclimate is right, where there's the right humidity, the right temperature, the right light exposure. Most people destroyed mosses by cleaning up forests, removing dead wood, letting in too much light. Ursula worked against this trend, not actively, but through her observations, through her documentation. She showed people that moss matters. Her collection was legendary. She had small paper bags, hundreds of them, each labeled with Latin names, collection site, collection date. Some bags were 20 years old, and the moss inside was dried, but it kept its shape. It kept its scientific identity. She could look at a piece of moss under a magnifying glass and tell whether it came from this place or that place, whether it was from this year or another year. That wasn't from memory. Ursula kept notebooks, thick green notebooks filled with data and observations. One day she showed me a moss, Sphagnum magellanicum, a sphagnum moss that grows in the most acidic parts of the forest. She said this moss was incredible, that it could store water in its cells like a sponge, and in doing so could influence the acidity of the water. This tiny, inconspicuous moss played an important role in the forest's chemical balance. A forest without sphagnum is a forest in danger because the acidity becomes overwhelming. But Ursula also said that sphagnum mosses were very sensitive. If the forest floor becomes too dry, if people drain it too much, if they dig too many drainage channels, then the sphagnum mosses disappear and the whole ecological balance tips over. She once led me deeper into the forest, to a place that particularly interested her. It was a small ravine where water always flowed, where it was cool and dark. There grew mosses I hadn't seen anywhere else, delicate and fine, pale green in backlighting, almost transparent. She said these were mosses you'd otherwise only find in rainforests, that they lived here at the edge of their range, that this small, damp forest was like a refuge for them. If the forest became drier, and in the long term it would, Ursula said, then these mosses would disappear. She wouldn't live to see the earth change, but her data would show it. The taxonomy of mosses was impossible for normal people. Ursula knew the differences, could distinguish the tiny details. Dicranum scoparium, for instance. It grows in large, dark green mats, and the leaves are folded in a way only this species has. Dicranella heteromala is similar, but the leaves crease differently, and when you look under a magnifying glass, you see the difference at once. Ursula said people needed patience to understand moss. Patience and time, and a good eye. The modern world had little patience. She also explained that mosses had a different way of living than larger plants. They had no roots, only small, hair-like structures, rhizoids, which served more to attach than to absorb water. Water came from above, from rain, from humidity in the air. The whole plant was like a sponge, absorbing and storing water. That's why mosses were so sensitive to dryness. A few weeks without rain and many moss species would dry out and die. Others would go into a kind of rest, would dry out, but wouldn't really die. When rain came, they'd turn green again. The patience of mosses was different from the patience of trees. Ursula also showed me how to collect and prepare moss. You carefully cut a piece off, with a knife, not with your hands, because fingers are too coarse. Then you place it on a piece of paper and let it dry. When it's dry, it becomes fragile, and you can wrap it very carefully in paper, labeled with date and location. These prepared samples last decades, perhaps centuries if stored properly. Ursula had thousands of such samples in boxes at the Institute in Dresden. This collection was her life's work, not just science, but also art, a loving documentation of a hidden world. She worked for a university in Dresden, no longer full-time, but still as a lecturer, as a consultant. She told me her speciality was dying out, that there were hardly any young people who wanted to study bryology. It was too specialized, too small-scale, too impractical. But the university libraries preserved her collections. The Saxon forests had through her work a documented baseline status. If in 100 years someone wanted to know how it looked here before, he would have her data. Ursula also spoke about the ecological importance of mosses with a passion that was contagious. Mosses stabilize the surface structure of the forest floor. They prevent erosion. They retain water. A forest floor without moss is a forest floor that dries out. Mosses also hold nutrients that would otherwise just be washed away. They're like an invisible network holding everything together. And that's not all. Mosses harbor an entire ecosystem. Tiny animals, insects, even small spiders, all dependent on the damp microclimate that moss creates. If the moss disappears, so does this whole tiny cosmos. Ursula said you could find more life forms in a square meter of moss than in a square meter of grass in a meadow. The most beautiful thing she showed me was a moss under the magnifying glass. I think it was Leucobrium glaucum, the white moss. Under normal conditions, it looks grayish-green, inconspicuous. But under the magnifying glass, when you have the right lighting, when you see the details, the leaves aren't simply green, but they have an inner structure of large, hollow cells and smaller chlorophyll-bearing cells. These cells are arranged like fine architecture. That's the hidden beauty, Ursula said. That's what I'm looking for. The forest isn't just the big trees. The forest is also what no one sees, the small, the delicate, the important. Now I sit here on the train, and we're traveling over the same route. And I think of Ursula and her gaze downward. I think of the mosses growing beneath the leaves, holding the moisture, buffering the acid, doing silent work that no one sees. The forest floor isn't dead earth. It's an entire world, a community, and the mosses are down there, documenting, growing, writing a story that perhaps only Ursula can read. Close your eyes and imagine laying your face very close to the forest floor. where the fine mosses grow, where the tiny green holds moisture, where the air is cool and dark, and the mosses whisper their names to you in a language only the patient understand. Give me your attention for a moment. I want to tell you about a woman I observed on the Garmisch to Oberau line, an ornithologist who got off at the same time every morning. It's spring, and morning is the best time when the forest sings. Hannah, I believe that was her name, always wore the same dark jacket with many pockets and a rucksack that looked heavy with cameras, notebooks, and binoculars. She got off the train at 5:30 when it was still dark, and the Oberau platform was empty except for sleeping crows on the power lines. She knew that forest like no one else, not from walks, no, but from decades of scientific observation. Her task was the complete documentation of the morning chorus, which birds sing, when they sing, how long, in what order, how it changes over the seasons. The morning chorus is not random, you understand. It is a hierarchy, a timing that the birds themselves don't consciously know, but that they follow like notes on a page. The sparrows sing first, their short, nervous calls, before the sun shows even a hint of red on the horizon. Then, perhaps 5 minutes later, the blackbirds, that rich, chocolate voice, so sad and beautiful that you always want to stop and listen. Then the wrens, the robins, the chiffchaffs, and the willow warblers. And then, when the sun really comes, a chord of 100 smaller birds breaks through the whole forest canopy. Hannah always sat on the same bench, about 100 meters from the station, in a spruce forest that was dark and dense. She wrote with pencil in her notebooks: time, bird species, volume, behavior. She calculated the sunrise time, corrected by her own time, added and subtracted. A change of 2 minutes fascinated her. A bird that sang later this year than last year. That was a story to investigate. Was it the temperature, the day length, a predictor for the coming summer? She told me once, we met by chance on the bench, that birds are very sensitive to changes in air humidity. On days when the air is very dry, they sing less or sing later. But when drizzle comes, a light, damp rain that only seems like a mist, then they sing more intensely and earlier. The reason is simple. Damp air carries sound better, and the birds know their voices will carry further. So it's worthwhile to start earlier, to make the most of the forest's best time, when everyone else is still asleep. The blue tits, she said, were the individuals, the wild ones. They sing almost all year, interrupted only by their molt in August and September. But the garden warblers, oh, they come only at the end of April, and when they come, they are masters of song. They are long-distance flyers and have just finished their journey from Africa. 2 weeks it takes before they're really conditioned and can sing their full song. For the first 2 weeks, they sing a simplified song, like singers still warming up their voices. I asked whether she could tell all the birds apart, thousands of individuals, you understand, many of which sang very similarly to one another. She laughed quietly and said, no, not that. But she could tell populations apart. She could hear whether a population was large or small, whether there had been a good breeding year, whether there was much offspring. Young birds sing differently from old, less pure, less sustained, full of mistakes. For her, that was like reading an annual report, and this forest report told her how the forest was doing, whether it was healthy or withering. One year, I think it was 2008 or 2009, she noticed something disturbing. The singers were arriving later, not by 2 minutes, no, by almost 2 weeks. The whole chain was shifted. The spring had been cold, and the insects, the food source for the birds, hadn't arrived early enough. So the birds had had to wait long in Africa until they realized it was time to fly. An entire forest, an entire ecosystem, had fallen out of rhythm. She also explained to me the deeper aspects of song. Male birds sing to defend their territory and to attract females. That's why the morning chorus is so intense. The males know that the females listen best at this time. It's not random that the intensity decreases after sunrise.
By this time, all territories are already settled. The females know where each bird lives. Morning is the moment of greatest power and greatest competition. Hannah told me that the females can even hear differences in the quality of song. A bird that can sing longer without getting tired signals strength and health. A well-conditioned bird can sing for hours and still hunt. That's what the females are looking for.
Her scientific method was precise. Every 10 seconds, she noted the weather, cloud cover, wind speed, temperature, because all of it affected the song. She always carried an old barometer with her and a thermometer. She also had a small device that measured air humidity. And then she had a large, heavy camera with a very good microphone with which she recorded the bird songs. She stored these recordings on small digital recorders. She said it was important not just to write, but also to listen, to capture the subtle differences that you might miss with your ears alone. The technology had changed drastically over her decades, from large mechanical recorders to small devices that fit in the palm of your hand. She showed me her notes, black moleskin notebooks, row after row, year after year. Each book covered one season, and together they were an archived century full of bird songs. She'd started her work in 1982 as a young woman with just a master's degree in ornithology. Since then, every morning, every spring, interrupted only by days of illness or grief, life was the side story. The birds were the main story. The forest around Oberau hasn't remained unchanged either. A new campground was built 5 kilometers away, but still, a small road was widened, a couple of houses were added. Hannah documented everything, how the choral song shifted and changed. New birds came, others left. A few species she hadn't heard for a long time returned. The lesser-spotted woodpecker, which she hadn't heard for 20 years, suddenly came back in 2015 and has been back every year since. That meant the forests were slowly getting better, that they were regenerating. There was hope in her notebooks.
I don't see her anymore, you know. That was years ago when I last saw her.
Perhaps she retired, or perhaps she still sits on the bench in the dark spruce and writes down her observations. But I remember she once said that all this data, 100 years of morning choruses, if you put them together, would belong to a university one day. Perhaps other scientists would analyze it, find patterns she herself hadn't seen. There was her comfort. The work wasn't for her alone, but for the future. But I know that when I pass by this place, and I pass by it every time I travel this line, that the birds are still singing, that they still push their song before the rising sun, that they crack the code of how the seasons work.
And now, as we travel, as this April night comes to an end and the east begins to lighten, you can hear, if you're quiet enough, the first sparrow, the first nervous call in the darkness. Later comes the blackbird, later still the many voices. Hannah perhaps still documents it, or her daughter, or a new ornithologist who has taken up the torch. The morning chorus plays on year after year, generation after generation. Let yourself glide into this forest, where the birds sing their turns, where the blackbird carries its chocolate voice, where the heat and light slowly come, and your thoughts become part of the chorus, a part of the forest, a part of the morning that never ends. You sit across from me in the compartment, and I see your fingers still stained green from the day's work. It's April, the best time, and I could tell you about a woman I observed on the Freiburg to Titisee line. Not today, no, but many years ago, again and again. She gathered wild garlic, you see, the spring gift of the forest. The wild garlic gatherer, let's call her Marguerite, always got off at the same place when the train slowed down. She'd learned when the conductor's whistle would ring, when it was time to pack her baskets and go into the forest. The scent of the forest floor after snow melt and damp earth,
That was her signal. She knew every square meter of the slope above Neustadt, where the beeches stood thick and dark, and between them the bright green wild garlic grew like a wave, leaf after leaf, plant after plant, as far as the eye could see. Margareta had not learned botany from books. She knew that true wild garlic, Allium ursinum, only grew where the groundwater conditions were perfect, where the soil was humus-rich and not too acidic. From a distance, she could already tell where it grew densely and where sparsely. Many people confuse lily of the valley with wild garlic, and that is deadly. But Margareta always smelled first. The scent revealed everything, garlicky, savory, unmistakable. Only the true plant smelled that way. On that April day, it must have been 1997 or perhaps 1999, the years blur, she stood at the bus stop and saw how the first large seed pods began to form. That was not yet the time to gather, no. She would wait until the leaves had their full strength, but before the flowers consumed all the energy. This knowledge was in her hands, in her sense of smell, in the decades she had spent on that slope. She told me once, yes, we met on a platform in Titisee, that you must never take the plant completely. The bulb must stay in the ground, you understand? Only the leaves, only the above-ground parts. That way, the plant comes back next year and the patch is preserved. Some people, and this hurt her, they came with spades and hoes and destroyed whole swaths. That's not gathering, she said to me. That's stealing. Her baskets were woven from willow branches, dark brown from decades of forest dampness and clay. She always carried 3, one large, 2 smaller. The large one for the wild garlic itself, layered with damp moss between the leaves so it wouldn't wilt. The smaller ones for other forest herbs, nettles, garlic mustard, ground ivy, the noble spring greens. She didn't estimate them separately, no. She gathered them together in a carefully defined order that only she understood. The processing happened in her tiny kitchen in Freiburg, in a house I never saw, but she described it. Large metal bowls full of water to wash the leaves, cold water, never warm, that destroyed the delicate cell walls. Then the chopping, fine granules, with a knife she sharpened herself at home with a whetstone. Then into jars with salt, with vinegar sometimes, with oil depending on the recipe, depending on the year. She made pesto from wild garlic. Not in the Italian way, she wouldn't do that, but in her way, with nuts from last autumn, with cheese, with oil from the mill. Each jar a work of art, which she brought to the weekly market in Freiburg. Always at the same stall, always the same customers, who waited for the new harvest like other people wait for spring. One day, or was it spring after that, I didn't see her anymore at her stop. A year passed, 2. I asked a conductor who said she'd become too old, she didn't gather anymore. My heart ached when I thought that the slope above Neustadt grew without her, that the wild garlic spread without her careful hands tending it. But you understand what she taught me in those fleeting encounters. That the earth is not simply there to be plundered, that every plant has a memory, a rhythm, a timing. Spring is not simply a season, it is a language if you want to understand it. The wild garlic speaks to you if you learn to listen. Next spring, every year when April comes, I think of Margaret and her green fingers. The forest on this line hasn't changed. The same beeches, the same damp air, the same green wave of Allium ursinum on the slope. Sometimes I imagine her sitting there still, invisible, watching the new gatherers, and she shakes her head because they don't understand, not really. And now it's spring this year, just as it was then. The air smells of forest and earth and that unmistakable garlic scent when you breathe deeply and lean your ear to the window and close your eyes. Let me tell you something else before sleep comes. There's an old botanical wisdom that Marguerite once told me. Wild garlic likes the shade, likes the damp air, likes being near the streams that rush invisibly beneath the earth. If you know where the springs are, you know where the plant grows thick, And if you understand the timing, not too early, not too late, then the forest gives you its treasures willingly, without you needing force. Marguerite showed me once on a spring day how to notice the tiny differences. Early wild garlic leaves are pale and tender, thin as parchment, with reddish veins on the underside. You can tell from that whether the plant has just awakened from rest or whether it has already gathered strength for several weeks. Later, when May comes, the leaves become thicker, juicier, greener, and that's when the taste is most intense, but also the moment when the flower buds begin to grow. The plant redirects its energy upward, then, into those delicate white flower umbels, and whoever understands knows. Now the peak is past. It's like a symphony. The best moment is not at the beginning and not at the end, but exactly in the middle, when everything comes together. She also told me of the other plants growing in the same forest under the beeches. The cuckoo pint, also poisonous if confused with wild garlic, but it has such different leaves, fleshy and dark green, that only the careless would miss it. The moscatel, the rose flower, which comes later and loves a different habitat. And the lily of the valley, that is truly the danger. Long, thin leaves. They look similar if you don't smell, but Margaret has said the nose never lies to you. Lily of the valley smells harsh and unfriendly, while wild garlic smells friendly and savory, inviting, as though it were saying, "Yes, take me, I'm ready." One image stayed with me from her. It was a morning, very early, and the train stopped longer than usual on the line. I saw her on the slope in her dark dress, and she just sat there, her hands on her knees, looking down at the forest. Her basket stood beside her, still empty. She said later she sometimes had to just watch and wait before gathering. The forest had to take its time, opening itself. The plants had to notice that someone was coming, with respect and with open senses. That sounds mad for a modern person, doesn't it? But when you grow old, you understand that it's not mad. It's the truth that the fast world has forgotten. The windows of the train grow dark. We still travel on this line, somewhere between Freiburg and Titisee, and outside it is April and spring, and the forest breathes the whole green power of the season. Margareta may long be dead, or perhaps she still gathers, very quietly and very softly, without the trains noticing. But her knowledge remains, in the hands of those who understood. Your eyes grow heavy, and the scent of the forest, the wild garlic, the damp earth, all of it glides into your dream, where the gatherers with their baskets, still and wise, stand at the forest's edge and wait for the next season.